Welcome guys, in this video we are going to learn the concept of data binding. The content of this video will include what is data binding, why data binding is needed, what are different types of data binding and how to implement them. This video does not include any hands-on coding. That we will start from our next video, so I urge you to subscribe to my channel so that whenever those videos are available you get a notification. Let's get started. This is part of the video series Angular course. If you have not watched the earlier videos, you can go through them for a better understanding. What is data binding? Our component is made up of two main pieces. One is our template or the HTML file, and the other one is the TypeScript file. Now this TypeScript file is often referred to as the component only. Generally, the component term refers to the collection of the TypeScript, HTML and the style sheet file, but within a context of component, if we are referring the TypeScript, we often use the term component. So if I am talking about the component, probably I am talking only about the TypeScript file, just to clear out a little confusion. But wouldn't it be great if these two main pieces of our component could talk to each other so that any change in the HTML or the template done by the user is sent to the TypeScript file, and also if after processing certain data, the data is ready, then we can also send it to the HTML so that user can see it. This is possible, and this is exactly what is known as data binding. This is the means of communication between these two pieces of a component. Now, why data binding is so much important? Our user directly interacts with one and only one piece of our code, which is our template. It interacts with the HTML file of our component. But any change or any action that the user is performing on the template should be known by the TypeScript for further processing. Probably we want to check certain logic, we want to provide some validation message to the user, or probably we want to send that data to our server. Generally that is done in the TypeScript file and is sent to our backend, generally through one another layer which is known as services. And again, when a data is available from our server or the backend, that is sent to the TypeScript file. There again, we perform certain logics or process the data so that we can display that data to the UI, and then it is sent again to the template and finally to the user. Now this communication between the template and the TypeScript is done through data binding. These two participates in a very close communication, so any change in the template is almost instantaneously propagated to TypeScript, and the change of the data within the TypeScript file is shown to the template. That's why data binding is so important. And this change is detected by Angular and is known as change detection mechanism. You will hear this term a lot. Change detection is a very important concept in Angular through which data binding works. What are the different types of data binding? There are four ways through which we can transfer the data between the template and the TypeScript file. First one is text interpolation or string interpolation. Second one is property binding. Third one is event binding, and the last one is two-way binding. You don't need to memorize this because these things are going to be used so much in your code that you don't have to memorize them separately. Let's have an overview of each of this data binding. I want to remind you again that in this video we are not going to do any coding, so it is just to give you an overview of each of this data binding and how it is going to be used in our code. There will be a lot of use cases that I will explain in our next video, so be sure after watching this video you also attend those videos. Let's start with text interpolation. We use text interpolation when we have some data in our component file, and as I said, if I am mentioning the component file, I am mentioning the TypeScript file. It should not make any further confusion. For example, we have a variable title and we want to display the value of the title within our template or HTML file. How to do that? It can easily be achieved through a particular syntax. We have to enclose that variable within two pair of curly braces, and the present value of our variable will be displayed to the HTML. You can observe that the data is going from the component file to the template, so this is an example of one-way binding. Next one is property binding. If we have certain value in the component and based on that value we want our template to behave. In this case, our purpose is to not display certain data, but we want to change certain behavior of our template using the condition or using the data of our component. That is achieved through property binding. In case of property binding, we enclose the attribute of our HTML element within a third bracket. In this case, disable is an attribute of our button element. But remember, this is little different from our normal attributes. All the attributes cannot be bound this way. This is how normal HTML attribute is differed from the DOM attribute. Angular refers to this attribute as DOM property, and this is little different than the normal HTML attribute. And however, in most of cases, normal HTML attribute are same as the DOM attribute, and they need to be enclosed within a third bracket, and then we assign the value of the variable with which we want to change it. In this example that you are seeing in the screen, actually disables a button based on the condition that is written on the component. So it is kind of changing the behavior of your template, which is done through property binding. Now you have to remember that this can also be achieved using the text interpolation, but this is not the right way to do it. If you want to change a DOM attribute of the template using the condition written in the component, you should go by property binding and not text interpolation, because text interpolation is only to display certain data to the user. In this case also, data flows from the component to the template, so this is also an example of one-way binding. Now let's talk about two-way binding. Now if we have certain data within our component and we want to display it to the template, but we also want to allow the user to make changes on that variable. Probably we have an input field and the user can make change on that input field, but the initial value is fetched from the component. Then we will go with the two-way binding approach. What happens in two-way binding? Any data that you send from the component to the template can also be changed within the template, and the data goes back to the component. This way, data can communicate in both ways, and this is an example of two-way binding. There is a special syntax for two-way binding. You have to use ng model and enclose it within a parenthesis and bracket, and then assign it to a variable which is defined in the component. That way, any change in the component will also be reflected to the template, and the other way around. There is one binding that we are left with where we can send data from the template to the component. Now this might not be necessarily data, this might be a user action which we want to propagate to the component. For example, user has clicked on a button and we want to perform certain action in the component based on that event, then that can be done using the event binding. If you look at the syntax of event binding, then you will see in the template we enclose the name of the event with a parenthesis. Here our name of the event is click. Now you might find a difference between the actual event that we see in our normal JavaScript, which is named as onClick. Here we actually remove the on prefix from our event name. So all the event that you already know of, like onChange, onClick, etc., will just be converted like click, and that event name is enclosed within a parenthesis, which is then assigned to a function. And then we assign a function to that event, which means when the event happens, the function that we have bound will be called, and we have to define that function in our component. In the event binding, you can also optionally send certain data from the template to the component, and I will show you how in our next video, where I will explain in detail what is event binding. In this example also, data flows from template to component and not the other way around, so this is also an example of one-way binding. Starting from the next video, we will implement each of this data binding in our code and see different use cases, and we will also see how these can solve very complex problems very easily. Just before that, we have a final task to do. We will implement one UI framework like Bootstrap or Material UI into our application so that we get a good look and feel. That's it for now. If you have any question, please drop them in the comment section. I also have a Telegram account, the link of which is provided in the description. If you have any doubt, I am glad to help you out. And please subscribe to my channel so that when the related videos are uploaded, you get a notification. I'll see you in the next one.